on attendance. I've got apologies from Councillor Lorman, Councillor Birch, the Chief Exec, Anna Earnshaw. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Anna Earnshaw is deputising for the Chief Exec. That makes a lot more sense. Thank you. Any other apologies?
Chrissy Smith-Hanks is going to be late.
Thank you. Notification of requests from the public to address the meeting. There are none. Declaration of members' interests. Any disclosable pecuniary interests or non-statutory disclosable interests on the agenda items that are not already listed in members' register of interests? No. Okay. Chairman's announcements. First thing to announce is we are now being webcast, which is something I know the committee was keen to happen. Helps with us trying to be open and transparent, which is something that we've spoken about time and time again. I've also had a request from a member of the public if members could please speak up when they speak. Obviously, we need to use the microphones for the webcasting anyway, but when you sort of turn away to make a point to colleagues, that sometimes takes away. So if you could all talk to the microphone, please. And that's also for my benefit, because I'm still a little bit hard of hearing. There's no fire drill scheduled during the meeting. If the fire alarm does sound continuously, please leave the building at the nearest exit and disperse away for at least 20 minutes or until told that it's safe to do so. There have been, following the Council's AGM last week, there have been a few changes to the committee, so I'd like to welcome Councillor Brookfield, who unfortunately isn't here, Councillor Irwin Swift, and Graham Lorman, who has given his apologies, who are replacing Councillors Stone, Sadigov and Goff as committee members. I'd like to thank those that are leaving for their contributions to the committee. They have all been useful members of the committee. I'd also like to announce that Councillor Perry is taking over from Councillor Eakins as Vice Chair of the committee, and I would particularly like to thank Councillor Eakins for the work he's done in that Vice Chair role, in particular about the work he was involved in regarding social worker recruitment and retention. We are always trying to adopt a more conversational style of questioning. So if members are questioning anybody, the leader, for example, you have the floor, carry on with the questioning until, until we stop you. Yes.
You say something when people speak to other member, and it's my understanding we should always speak to the chair. So you should not have any sound because we will always speak to you.
That'd be nice, and I'd like to hear everybody's contribution.
But that is what we should do, that we should do, so like that the public can hear us.
Indeed. But talk to the microphone, talk to me. But I say we are trying to be less formal, perhaps, than some other committees as well. But I will step in and advise and stop anybody that's crossing any particular lines. Also, I would encourage, as always, members of the committee to keep their lines of inquiry focused on the relevant agenda item to help ensure that the meeting proceeds efficiently. I have circulated, I don't know if there are enough copies, the questions that we as a committee put into the last Cabinet meeting regarding their finance report. These were questions that went to the finance portfolio holder following an informal meeting of committee members that we hold just before each Cabinet member. The meeting we had went on for just a little over 2 hours, and it was quite intense. Consequently, there were 3-4 pages of comments and questions that went to Cabinet. Now, I appreciate that's perhaps why we haven't yet had a response from Cabinet. Part of what we're trying to do, of course, is not only pass on any concerns, advice or commentary to Cabinet members, but also to ask genuine questions for scrutiny, but also for individual members to get an understanding. Local authority finance is complicated, and I think that's probably more true in Northampton County Council than anywhere. We're not trained professionals, we're not accountants, we're not SIPFA qualified, so I think it's really important for us to get answers to these questions, just so we can all hopefully get an overview on sort of what's happening financially. We haven't had as far as I'm aware, we haven't had a formal response to these questions yet, which I think actually is a little unfortunate, because what I'm really conscious of doing, we don't want to sort of get behind and play catch-up. In a couple of weeks' time, we'll be looking at next month's finance papers. So hopefully we can chase up a response from Malcolm Longley on that. We also, as we'll see later, haven't yet had a response to the two items that went to May's Cabinet from this committee, the early years payments and children's improvement plan. We'll be discussing that more in the work programme later on. I'm not as concerned that we haven't yet had a response, because I appreciate that those are big substantive items, and I appreciate that Cabinet need to take their time to give us a proper response, and when we do get that response, we'll be able to discuss it at whatever meeting is appropriate. Next item on the agenda then, the minutes of the overview and scrutiny meeting on the 24th of April. Could I ask members to agree that those are a correct and accurate record? Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to add on the declarations of interest, albeit a little bit out of sync. I think I actually did declare that I was a governor of Ruskin Infant School in Wellingborough, and I'd just like that to be added if maybe.
Duly noted.
And thank you very much for your kind words. As I'm stepping down from Vice Chair, I'm sure my replacement will be suitably able to take over.
And I'm sure you will still contribute well to the committee.
I certainly will, Chair.
I'll be surprised if you didn't. Are we agreed that those are an accurate record?
Subject to Councillor Eakins' point.
Subject, of course, to Councillor Eakins' point. Thank you, James. Somebody nod or say yes. I'll take that. Thank you. Okay, and that, I think, brings us on to item 6, which is the substantive item today. Costs to Northamptonshire County Council of delivering local government reform. I'm pleased to announce, I'm sure you've already seen, that the leader of the council is here. Hopefully we'll be able to give us some further updates on what's happening regarding this. He's probably in a better position than anybody. Matt is only able to stay for half an hour, 40 minutes maximum. If we need longer to discuss this discussion, we'll have to do without him. But I appreciate you coming. Sorry, Richard.
Yes, just with regard to, looking at the authors of the report, Anna's a very good deputy, there's no doubt about it. But during a lot of the discussions in local government reform, whether that be on the steering group, the joint committees, the chief executive of NCC has been absent and sent deputies. Now, there may be a good reason why Teresa Grant can't make it today. She may be on holiday. But I'm just wondering whether there is a trend with regard to deputisation, because sometimes it is about this symbolicness of this is quite a historic, and we do need to see our chief executive more at these meetings. Although I would say that Anna is an absolutely excellent deputy, but sometimes it is about symbolism and that. So I'm just raising that, and to ensure that when Teresa is available and we have a document that she's authored, that to be present. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm informed that you are correct in your assumption. She is on leave at the moment.
It's Councillor Irving-Swift.
Yes, sorry.
I think I find what Councillor Auger just said a bit misleading. Frankly, if the chief exec cannot trust her top team, we are indeed in deep trouble. So I think it's the chief exec and the top team, and they can be, because I find that it's a figurehead, maybe, but I think we should not speak to in those terms about the team who leads the council, and the chief exec is just one of them. And please, I will discard or try to change the comment of Councillor Auger.
Okay, I'll bring in Richard very quickly. I don't want to drag this conversation
I just think that was,
out.
to be honest, that's an inappropriate comment by Cecile. I wasn't actually criticising. I was raising an issue of experience and the importance of this time. It was just raising the fact that these are important meetings, and there has been a trend of absence over a period of time. So I wasn't criticising, I was raising the importance of this. And I think her comments are ill-advised. Thank you.
Okay, I don't want to stop any member of this committee from expressing their view, and I think you both make valid points. You may have different opinions, but I think we also need to move on from this and get to the substantive nature of the report, which you should all have in front of you on agenda item 6. Sorry, do either of you want to make any overall comments on where we're at the moment with this? Yep.
Well, I'm happy to start. So the reason I've got to nip off is because we've got the leaders and chief execs meeting this morning as a regular part of the programme, and we're at a pivotal point with that now, where we've got a very heavy agenda today to talk about things like accountable roles within the programme, who's going to be the senior accountable officer, and agree a whole sort of reboot and refresh of where we are with the programme. And that, in my mind, is quite an exciting thing, because as the report says, I think the report is very good that you've got here. It's quite a good summary of exactly where we are, incorporates the thinking around where we are with the costs. And of course, we now know we've got the decision that it's not 2020 we're looking at, it's 2021. So instead of, if you look at the where are we now paragraph, and it talks about the 43 million that was talked about previously, that was to get us to that was more of a process to get us to over the line. Safe and legal was the terminology we were using for day one, next April, May, basically. Now we've got the date confirmed as the following spring. We can look much more in terms of the transformational opportunities, which completely changed the theme of what we're looking to try and achieve in the short term, in terms of day one, the vesting day of the two new unitaries. So as I mentioned in my speech at council last week, there's an incredible amount of work has gone into the programme. The programme that we're looking at now, and I refer everybody to the June the 10th briefing that we've got for members, cross-party briefing, that should shed a whole lot more light on the intricacies of the programme and where we are with it, providing the leaders and chief exec, or the leaders, can agree to where we are with that today, which is why it's important I nip back over the road. So in terms of costs, which is the general theme of the question, I think they're covered quite well in terms of what the additional ask would be, and it talks between £1 and £2 million extra each per authority, and then the use of the business rates pilot to fund the transformational elements of it. And there's a bit of a breakdown of the theme of what that's talked about, and also how that sits with the budget and the transformational budget that's already been allocated in the 1920 substantive budget. So it should all pull together, and everything that NCC are looking to do over the next year should gel and mould into this whole programme, which is at that pivotal point to kick on to the next phase, really. So I think the report covers everything pretty well in here. And just going back to the point of the chief exec is there at the leaders and chief execs meeting. She's been instrumental. There's recognition that Teresa Grant's got a lot of experience in what she's done in Manchester in terms of transforming the services, bringing in health and integrating things a lot more heavily. And that's really key into the themes of what we're looking to try and do with the programme. And again, I make the point, it makes it much more of an exciting prospect for us as members, because of course we're here to transform the services, do what we can for the public, instead of a process of getting to day one safe and legal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I guess the overall interest of the committee is what the total cost is likely to be, and of course some of that is split into transformation of services, some of that is almost the admin of setting up the new unitaries, and of course how will this be paid for? I mean, there's reference made to the extra money coming in from the business rates pilot. I mean, will that be enough? I don't know. I've got a couple of speakers. Adam? Oh, sorry, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the business rates pilot, I'd just be keen to know whether we have agreement from the districts and boroughs about the earmarking of those funds for the transformation cost, because I'm concerned that in some districts and boroughs they may have other designs on that pot of money, and we may end up with another significant bone of contention in terms of a county versus district and borough battle. So I'd just like to know where we've got to in terms of discussions on the use of the business rates pilot money for transformational costs, and whether this has been discussed in full with Ds and Bs.
I suppose that opens up a wider question in how well the districts, boroughs and the county are all working together.
I can confirm we're completely joined up on this one. So the governance for any approved schemes within the business rate pilot was agreed some time ago anyway, which is a combined leaders group, isn't it, in terms of the decisions. The list of projects that will be considered is a combined list, a shared list, an integrated list. Every single district and borough, and we have sight of that, we've all put into it. We've all created business cases that sit behind it. And we've also been through, obviously, there's a criteria which was set out in a letter from the Secretary of State, at which for what things we can use it for and things we can't. That's all agreed to. One of the tasks for today is actually to go through that, because this is part of an integrated programme. And the whole point of where we've now moved to is that everything comes together. NCC's transformation, the business rate pilot stuff, LGR transformation, and getting to safe and legal as one single programme. So everybody is cited and agreed on everything in that programme.
Can I just add to that, Chair? Just, I don't want to cover what Anna just said, but I think the programme and the willingness to work together is in the best place it's possibly been since the start, really. I know we've had a couple of minor bumps in the road, but it's in a really good place, I would say, in terms of the relationships and the openness.
Richard?
Yeah, it's just the sort of drill it down to the figures. Now, in 3 paragraph B, it says that it's anticipated that additional 1 million to 2 million will be found from reserves. That's from us, from NCC, yeah? Is that correct?
So at the moment, we have a transformation agreed shared budget, which includes all the different elements it says. So at the moment, that's what we're expecting, yes. We may, I was talking to Ian this morning, choose to use flexible use of capital receipts for ours, but the general assumption, and I think most of the other district and boroughs had already put it through in their budgets, was that around £1 million to £1.5 million would be found from reserves too. So, but that's the order of magnitude. We will have to find whether it is flexible capital receipts or...
No, yeah, I think where the money comes from
is neither, but £1 million to £1.5 million.
Yeah, the question is, so what is the total sum? So what is the total sum of the bill? Because we've seen various figures of 43 million. Do you remember those figures that came out? And then we had a more conservative. So what's the current estimate of the cost of going from districts and boroughs and county to unitary? Do we know that what the top ceiling figure would be? That's the first part of the question.
So at the moment, the estimated cost is still in the same order of magnitude, still about 43 million. The difference is this time is that is split between a significant amount of transformation activity, which was estimated to be around about 20 million, and a much smaller programme in terms of the things you'll remember that were in the very detailed, just cheaping people and doing all the mechanics, if you like, for want of a better phrase. So the overall budget envelope is still the same, but a significant shift in focus in terms of transformation. And the big piece of work we've now got to turn our attention to is the return on the investment, because I think all members queried at the time, didn't they, that actually we're spending all this money, but for what? Because there were no savings till after the event. So the whole plan, and why we're pleased that we've got the extension, is to start to create a return on that investment ahead. So you'll see investment in things, for example, like shared customer service centres and shared websites and digital innovation. So that's all in there too. So we'll start to get some savings back in, and those business cases will be worked up in the robust way we're used to. So in effect, we'll start putting money back into the pot to offset the 43 million.
The question in. Okay, so the first obvious question is how confident are we on the 43 million? I know it's a finger in the air job to a certain extent, but there must be some science behind this estimate. So how confident are we that this is the ceiling? And with regard to we know what happens to budget. Sometimes expenditure is more than the 43. Have we got a contingency of it drifting sort of north of 43 million, or could we expect it to be less? How confident are we about that figure? That's the first part of the question.
Confident in the sense of all the chief execs and leaders have been through it, all the finance leads have been through it and checked it. As you'd imagine, it's based on quite a bit of experience of people and what we've done before. There is contingency in there of about, from the top of my head, sorry, I should have brought all the figures in, about 4 million, I think. So there is room for manoeuvre. But our biggest contingency clearly will be, as we develop all these business cases with returns on investment, will be actually mitigating some of those costs as we go. But yes, there is contingency in there. It's robust in terms of risk management and allowing for that kind of slippage. But key to it obviously will be the governance and that we deliver on time and do the things we say.
The last part of the question would be, is this the same to do? So that 43 million is the total bill. So presumably we need the contingency to be able to fund that. With regard to the business, it doesn't give us any sort of figures on the business pilot. Is how much of a movable feast is that with regard to income coming in to help? Because presumably that's helping fund part of the 43 million. Do we know roughly how much, and have we got a contingency if it doesn't reach our expectations? Does that make any sense? So we're not expected to get as much from business rates, therefore we've got to find it from somewhere else. So yeah.
So the total business rate pilot is actually based on a real calculation of business rates that come in, which is 21 million. This assumes use of 18 million of it, I think. Ian might want to correct me. But you have to keep a contingency back anyway. That's part of the rules of it being given to you. So that has to be held back in case of any issues. So we're only talking about spending what we've been allowed to spend, which is about 18 million towards it. And it's already based on what the real prediction of business rates will be.
That's it for now, thank you.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. Carrying on Richard's on one and then IT. So if we just take the first one first. NCCIP has approximately 80% of the provision of services that are going to be shared between the two unitaries. So is the split share going to be equal of setting it up across the 7 Ds and Bs and the NCC is one question. The second one is, we're covering out that the cost of transformation into unitary at the moment is estimated at 43 million. Is the cost of setting up the shadow unitary council, or councils, because there'll be two, also included in that costs of 43 million, or is that going to be additional? That's the first part of the question. The next one is IT, so if we can do this one first if you want.
I'll answer the first bit of that. And so the costs has been agreed that we would all contribute equally. So originally we put £500,000 each, and I don't think we've quite used all that up yet.
And the answer to your question is the setup of the shadow unitaries, everything is included. So the setup of that, any appointment of interim officers and all the work to set it up and run the shadow pending the full councils being set up and live.
The whole idea of those questions is that we don't come up with any surprises later on when someone says, oh, by the way, we haven't included this, so we now have to include that. So that's a good thing. If I can just move on to my second question, Chair, at the moment, which is, we're jumping a little bit more because it's about IT. In under 3C, going down there, the 6 bullet points at the end, ways of working, model care, community hub, workforce development, I think they're almost a given. The only concerns I have is over the ICT infrastructure. Now, as we all know, anybody involved with IT, it can become a black hole unless it's contained and administered properly, because you just, with IT, just throw money away and it doesn't go very far. But my question on that is, at this moment in time, which portfolio does that come under? And not only that, is that as we move to 2 unitaries, we've already proved that in children's, Chair, at the moment, is that there was a difference between the platforms that were monitoring the payment systems, which then causes a few issues. So what I'm trying to get at is, whatever IT solution we select going forward, then at the moment, as I say, all the Ds and Bs have to be on board with that. Then the 2 unitaries also have to be on board on that with the NCC to ensure that we all use the same platform or versions of the same platforms going forward. So therefore, that we don't have an issue created, what we'd create at Children's, where some are not compatible with others. And it's an expensive part of moving forward when you merge 7 Ds and Bs and a county council into 2 unitaries, and hopefully that the IT system is going to be working across all.
I'll just start on that and then pass over to Anna for the technicality. In terms of governance, the IT, as with all the other areas or portfolios, as you say, will be, if we agree this programme, there will be a shared leadership, but with a senior responsible officer in charge of, Anna's got the different things there, like education services, children's social care, adult social care, housing, benefits, customer contact, regulatory services, for example. So somebody, one of the senior officers that might not necessarily, CEOs, that might not necessarily be the NCC CEO, will have operational or oversight or strategic oversight of how this is going to move itself forward. So that sort of sheds light on the wider programme in that it is totally integrated. We're all working together to the same end. It fits, it should fit as seamlessly as possible with what the needs of NCC as the needs of the districts and boroughs as we start and pull it all together. But Anna, if you want to add to that.
Yeah. So in response to your question on ICT, we've actually been agreeing and sharing all ICT plans for some months. But you're absolutely right. So we've been looking at any opportunity that comes up, anybody that's letting a contract. So, for example, this afternoon I will be going and talking to them about the Care First replacement for adult and children's. So although it's an NCC decision, it's important they understand the logic and they approve and agree it. So part of our process will be that everybody, all councils, will go and talk about any investment like this, what they're doing. We're already looking at opportunities to share infrastructure. So to move to Office 365 for our SharePoint site, we're looking at shared platforms for the existing WAN network infrastructure. Same with websites. For example, we've already established that many use the same things for committee papers so that we can share those. And then we're looking where people don't have that facility to join them onto the existing platforms. So that's a very, very live conversation, and to be fair, one we'll be doing for a long time, but in effect there wouldn't be any ICT spend without us all agreeing that that was the right thing to do and then looking for the opportunities to rationalise across us.
Thank you. I've got Adam, Jill and Richard. Adam, and Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. There's only one mention in the paper of the Children's Trust, which is probably the headline issue that came out of the Secretary of State's announcement. And in 3A of the paper, there's no mention of the Children's Trust. It doesn't clarify whether the proposed additional funding of 1 to 2 million accounts for the requirement to set up the Children's Trust. The 43 million figure cited in the paper is, to the best of my understanding, not a particularly recent figure. It's a figure that was in circulation right at the beginning of the year, if not before, when the issue of the Children's Trust hadn't arisen, at least in the public domain. So my question is whether we can be confident of the 43 million figure, given the newly public issue of the requirement to set up the Children's Trust, whether the work between leaders, chief executives and senior officers on the Children's Trust has adequately scoped the potential costs of setting up that trust, and most importantly, whether Northamptonshire will retain oversight of the Children's Trust and of children's services in this county, because there has been public discussion on the potential for children's services to be outsourced, for other counties to take over our children's services. And I think particularly from a taxpayer's point of view, it would be completely inappropriate for Northamptonshire taxpayers to be bearing the cost of children's services, but for there to be no democratic oversight of those services within Northamptonshire. So if we can have some reassurance that leaders and chief executives will be fighting tooth and nail to retain that control in Northamptonshire, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, well, I'll start with that one. First of all, Adam's quite right. We've got the decision, and that's a key moment. But in terms of scoping up the costs for that, the work hasn't been done on that substantively. So what we will be doing is working with government to ask if there's any funding that they can help to support and cover some of the costs of that. And in terms of the bit around another local authority showing interest, I think that was actually published in the Children's Commissioner's first letter, but the whole thing has moved on since then. That was a consideration that he's discounted, basically. So we will still have oversight through the governance of how the trust is set up. So it will be our role and responsibility in terms of the outcomes, but it will be delivered by the trust. You want to add to that? Yeah.
Sorry. So just to be clear on your points though as well, this 43 million, I know it is the same figure, it's not the same set of costs. So this is a set of costs that have been developed in real detail over the last couple of months. And they contain different things, and we'll shortly hopefully be able to share all of that, subject to today's meeting and going through that process. It does include the disaggregation of children's services and education services, because education services will remain in the new unitaries. So it does include the processes to actually split everything that needs to split between those two. The setup of the trust is a slightly different issue. As you'd expect, Teresa's been talking about this as part of a likely outcome for some time in confidence, so we have been planning on that basis to do that. The other thing, just in terms of scrutiny, as well as the client arrangements for managing the trust, is that both authorities have to retain a DCS. So they stay legally responsible for the delivery of children's services, just as they do for adult services, and you have to have a statutory officer in them. So even though it might be delivered somewhere else, that DCS will hold the responsibility for that contract, and the contract will be agreed in advance, which will set out the SLAs. So, for example, in my area, it would be very important that transitions from adults to children's remains really strong and well managed. So it will set out all of those things, and a DCS sitting in the new unitaries in each of them will be responsible for making sure it meets the duties.
So responsibility for policy in terms of children's services will remain in Northamptonshire?
DCS being Director of Children's Services. Okay. Finished? Yes, thank you. Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Before I come to the question I was going to ask, if I could just pick up on Councillor Eakins' question, because what I thought he meant was what member of the Cabinet portfolio will be taking on the IT, because you told us some of the sort of technical details, but I didn't get the sort of idea of who would be overseeing that.
So I think it's important to say there's a difference between the unitary programme and what has to be implemented as part of that and change programmes going forward. Each council remains a sovereign council. So in terms of our day-to-day IT and everything we do, it's still the current portfolio holders and Matt's cabinet in exactly the same way. The only difference is that as part of the integrated programme, there will be new things coming along that we might do. So those decisions will also get referred into that process and decisions made, and then design decisions made and then implemented. But in terms of the council's responsibility, remains the portfolio holders as they exist now.
And they are?
Which is you, isn't it? IT and transformation.
Yeah.
And my substantive question was that this 43 million, I'm confused about this because in the paper it seemed to suggest that that was the old figure, and you said this new 43 million isn't the same one. But I got the impression that with business rates pilot, the money set aside for transformation, and that we'd already got in the budget, there was, say, another 4 million to find. But it doesn't seem to aggregate that into 43, and it doesn't add up to 43 either, by my calculations. So I just wonder whether we could have a bit more of a breakdown of how that new figure, what it actually covers, and what bit of it covers what, because I can't seem to sort of get the thread of that overall.
Yeah, there will be a full breakdown. There's a whole prospectus that's been put together to outline all the programme. That will be available because it hasn't technically been agreed yet, which is what we're looking to do today, really. So that will be available for that 10th June briefing.
Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just two questions. They're slightly different areas. The first one is to do with the scrutiny arrangements for the 43 million. Now I'm not quite sure who ultimately is responsible for the spending of this money. You know, I don't even know who's responsible for spending the original 4 million, and where is the oversight in that spend? You know. In NCC, we have the Chair of Scrutiny Committee meeting the finance portfolio holder on a regular basis. And I just can't work out, maybe I've missed it in the fog of us setting up the steering groups and the joint committees and the task and finish. Is there a body of elected politicians who are meeting with whoever is responsible for spending this money to ensure that it's being spent correct? I appreciate we're still waiting to agree the 43 million, but what is being set up to ensure there is a real grip of this, so we don't get mission creep, we don't get overspends, and that if we do, we could take mitigating actions, and that is made aware to the political leaders as well as the officers. So that was the first point.
Okay, well, it is the oversight of the politicians, and that's through the steering groups that were delegated through the decisions that we put through council, and a part of the joint committees, and a part of. One of the things I know we keep referring to the meeting today is there's a whole suite on the future governance of the whole programme, and again, when that's agreed, we'll make sure that gets shared. But I can assure you that it is the leaders that have full oversight and steer on the programme.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. But I certainly in the steering group, I've never sat down and gone through what has been spent of that 4 million, how it's been spent, and why it's been spent. So we haven't had that sort of level of scrutiny. If you're saying that is being exercised by the leaders and the chief execs, then I take your word for that. But for me, it is about understanding that we do have that third eye. As we currently have with the Scrutiny Committee now, really looking into these things. And I'm just surprised that it doesn't seem to be in the forefront to ensure that we spend monies wisely, even though we may be doing it at the Chief Exec. Does that make any sense? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think that's fair. But to now, we've not had any more ask of financially than the £500,000 that all the 8 authorities have put in. I think it is a good suggestion to try and weave this back through to scrutiny, so there is a regular update on the programme, and that you can get some reassurance on the money that's being spent, because obviously that will, once we get into the programme, start to start to increase.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Can I just add to that a little bit? Of course, the complication in that is that somehow we got involved with all the districts and boroughs because it's their money as well. And I know that with regard to the shadow authority, there's some talk about not holding a shadow authority, but rather just keeping the joint committees in place until the vesting day. But it really needs to be, and it's a plea for the leaders and the chief execs to ensure that whatever we have, whether it's a bespoke scrutiny committee or whether we can encompass in there, we need to have that intimate involvement and oversight of the spending of this money to making sure that we don't overspend the 43 and save where we can. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think this is something that we can perhaps discuss further when we're coming to our conclusions and commentary at the end, because you brought up some good possible suggestions there. I've got Chris Stanborough, myself, Julie, Malcolm and Jill and Jonathan. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So, Matt, if I can ask you about this figure of £43 million, which is the same as the old £43 million, but it's different makeup, and you've got a meeting this morning that you're going to with the other leads and chief executives, would I be correct in thinking that at that meeting you're going to be saying on behalf of the County Council that we as a body are happy with that figure, and you're advocating that the group agree that figure as the budget for this process?
Yes.
Excellent. So that will move things along. As regards the County Council's contributions to that figure, I think we've heard what's said earlier on. At full council on 28th of February, we said we weren't going to make any further contributions. Presumably, our position will now change if we're now agreed, and there'll be some process by which we as a group, as a council, agree that we're now prepared to consider further or make further contributions financially. Would that be correct too?
Yes, but there's still not, as it stands, there's not an ask of council needing to put more money into the programme. So I'm happy to agree on the broader sense that the budget is good to go in terms of the contributions that are already made, the way the business rate pilot money is looking to be used, and also the fact that the NCC transformational part in the budget this year gets included in that wider 43 million, which just happens to be a similar number to the previous one, which adds a bit of confusion in there. But if we need to, I will have to speak to the commissioners, and the governance part, going back to what we did say at council, have to put something in place to put that through and feed it into the programme. But as it stands, there isn't an immediate ask for any more money of the programme as it is now.
Just on in terms of timing of contributions towards the cost of the expenditure, would I be right in thinking that the County Council and other councils are going to be expecting that the first call will be for money will be on the business rates pilot money once the contributions we've already made have run out, and that therefore it may be some time before councils have to find money from their own resources?
The programme costs aren't structured. Sorry, I know it's really difficult when we haven't sort of published it, but at a headline level, the 43 million is made up of the 6 million that the County Council is already approved in its budget to do transformation. So expenditure on the NCC transformation programme. An existing budget that existed of 3 million, or it's 4 million, but $1 million's been spent. 18 million of business rate pilot investment and 16 million of programme costs. So they will be spent on different things in different orders. So clearly the business rate pilot stuff, the business cases, once approved, will start expenditure, but with a plan to return on that investment and put back into the pot. So when we get to the point that you need more input to it, if you sort of mean, or we need to contribute more to it, it may not be as simple as we're just going to get it all in. We're going to work through an integrated programme that tracks all of our costs, tracks the benefits coming in, and then work through them, but in parallel.
I'm sorry, Chair, if I can just continue a little. The briefing document that we received, which clearly was written prior to the Minister's announcement, or I'm assuming was written prior to the Minister's announcement, and is therefore based on a one-year programme. So, for instance, at one point it tells us that there's an assumption that £30 million will be incurred prior to transfer and £13 million will be expended by the new authorities after go live. I'm assuming now that's incorrect, and that the resources are going to be found in their entirety, not by the existing authorities rather than the new authorities. Is that right?
Sorry, I think, apologies if it's not clear, what you're talking about is the previous controversial 43 million that everybody was asking about was the previous scoped programme for Just Safe and Legal. It was 43 million, 30 incurred then, 13 afterwards. The new 43 million, just so ignore what went before, is based on transformation and everything that needs to happen prior to vesting day. So they're not the same thing. This is a 2-year programme now to do everything, get us live, get us transformed, and get us working in a different way for day one.
What I'm trying to establish is the 43 million, that's the new 43 million, all of that cost will be incurred either from the business rate pilot or from the budgets of the currently existing authorities, whether that comes from reserves or from tax revenue or other sources. I'm seeing nodding, but is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I'm still a little confused as to how this relates to this year, 1920 budget, and indeed next year, in particular about how much of it is going to be delivered through savings through the transformation that are in the budget. If I understand correctly, you'll be offering a more detailed breakdown of these costs on the 10th of June, and will we be generally getting a more sort of detailed reform programme at that time? Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, and I need to go as soon as I can, Chair, if that's okay.
However, I do have, I mean, you go when you need to go, but I do have more questions. Julie, and then after that I've got Malcolm, Jill, Jonathan and Cecilia.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that we're going to be having a breakdown of all the costs, because that was something that I was concerned about, that it was all just lumped and then it was broken down. Mine is more about the 20 million transformation. If you can explain how that comes into the 43 million, or does it? Thank you.
Sorry, which 20 million? What, something that says in this paper?
Oh, I thought that, no, I wrote that down as what
No. No, so that there is a fund available from business rates pilots of 21 million, of which we're expecting to spend 18 on transformation from the business rate pilot. The other transformation funding in there already is the NCC already approved budget for our own transformation programme. That's all, just those two items. The rest of it is programme costs.
So that does add up.
Yes, to 43.
Well, in terms of transformation, in terms of the business rate, it is
18
17,
plus ours.
18 plus the 6. Yeah.
Okay, because talking of transformation, I'm just wondering how you're feeling about where everyone is at, because I know that I was a little surprised that with certain portfolios that we weren't advancing as much as well we were hoping to. So I wonder how you feel about that. And also, is it possible to have each, say, portfolio, and I know officers haven't got enough to do already, but if they could do like an action plan for each, so we know, because I still don't totally understand what they're doing and how much they expect to save from everything. And then along with costs for this, we can make sure both are on track, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, okay. Well, we've got our transformation strategy, which underpins the delivery of this year's budget, which is a very important document, and I think that's something that Scrutiny need to ask the officers.
It is, and it's something we will be looking at,
Yeah.
and indeed I'm also hoping that the 10th of June briefing that you're talking about will cover some of Julie's points as well.
I think it will, and when I know I keep saying about the programme when it's agreed, but it will become a lot more clearer, and hopefully you can appreciate very quickly that instead of the old 43 million programme, which was safe and legal and a process to get to day one, this opens up a whole other raft of opportunities that becomes a much more exciting and integrated.
I'm conscious of your time, and I say just go when you need
All right,
to,
I'll go
but
now.
I'll try. Oh, you go now, yeah? Okay. But I'll bring people in as quickly as I can. Sorry, you want...
No, I did just want to follow on from that, because what I was thinking is to have like action plans every month we meet, so we can scrutinise it and just make sure. I know you've got a whole plan, but if we, and then every month they can tick off what they have done and what's going well and what isn't, you know, just to keep a tight hold on costs and transformation, because we rely on that, don't we?
That may be a valid suggestion, and again, I think that's something we can discuss as part of our conclusions and any recommendations.
I'm sure Matt will agree with me. That, without extra work, that is already available, isn't it, as a dashboard on each of the transformation projects. So that wouldn't be any extra work for us to have it, that Paul Ellsby's produced. It's really easy to access documents. So that could just be a tick box exercise that we have oversight of those.
But again, let's discuss it after.
We just need to find a mechanism to feed that back through through this committee.
Absolutely. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair.
And thank you.
Just
Leader.
a very quick question to you, Matt, before you go, because I believe it's an important question.
Well done.
I welcome, I'm sure everybody in this room welcomes, even beyond this room, the meeting on the 10th of June, because there's something very important that we all must take on board, and that is the facts. And those facts will come out on the 10th of June. Have you got any plans, which I carry on from Judy's probably thinking as well, of future meetings? Do we need to meet every quarter? Because we need to know the facts, because we've got to deliver these facts and figures down to other members, B&D members that we all represent as well. They will want to know, but more important, probably the general public will want to know as well. So I'm just wondering whether you have a programme of other meetings like the 10th of June, which we can all benefit from. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree, Malcolm. A big part of this is how we communicate with members, but more importantly, how we bring public along with us, because we provide in public services, and we've got that's all in for consideration. Yeah.
And again, that's something we can sort of possibly put forward as some sort of recommendation, but let's move on for now. Jill.
Thank you. Coming back to this 43 million again, I'm sorry we keep coming back to that, but it is obviously the core. Initially, I thought that the safe and legal 43 million originally was because trying to do things in 1 year, we'd have to bring in quite a lot of outside help, sort of consultants, etc. And obviously that comes at a cost. I'm quite surprised that going to a 2-year, when we're probably able to perhaps use our own staff as well as running their current services, might have been a bit less cost, I would have thought. So I'm just concerned that we're, why is it coming to about the same amount? It just perhaps is a coincidence that it's coming to about the same amount. But I wonder if we're managing with our current staff or whether we're having to bring out outside people in.
No, so there is a difference. As you said, the previous programme was a 1-year programme. It assumed a huge amount of backfill by interim staff on day rates. The other thing that it assumed, which made it very expensive, was that nobody changed buildings, nobody moved, everybody stayed working where they were, and that there were major sort of rebranding and refurbishment for getting the councils ready. In the new programme, so as you said, we've got 2 years, there is still an assumption about SMEs that we might need to bring into backfill in the service, but because we've got 2 years, we'll be looking at fixed-term contracts, and as you know, the NCC transformation programme, so its cost, bearing in mind the amount of savings it's got to deliver, is only 6 million. So if it's only 6 million to deliver a £43 million programme, then why in the unitaries for safe and legal was the programme cost 43 million? So to mean it wasn't actually, in terms of the previous plan, wasn't good value for money. So now we're assuming more use of fixed-term staff, more use of existing staff with some backfill SMEs. We're assuming that we will be able to take the opportunity to consolidate some of the buildings and do some smart stuff around IT. We've looked at the opportunities already to do that and across contracts and things like that. So we're assuming a lot more self-funding activities, but we're also assuming a much more sustainable programme cost. So the programme costs now are 16 million. Previously, in effect, 43 million was entirely just a programme cost and all the associated things that were with it. So the costs have gone down significantly because we've changed the approach, and by bringing together all of the programmes, so NCC's programme, disaggregation, aggregation, the business rate pilot, we get the economies of the shared programme team. So one programme team sitting across everything we do.
Sorry, can I come back? So basically you're saying we're getting more bang for our buck, that we're getting the transformation as well for basically the same cost we would have had just safe and legal. And so it's going to be better. I mean, I think what we'd like to see is, how that transformation, and that will obviously be going onto that more, what it will give, and particularly interested in the joining up with health and any implications that has. So.
Just to respond, so in health itself as well, on top of this, we have been working with the district borough leads and CEOs and all our health chief execs, and have separately pitched for additional funding to health, to the ministers and everything, around an integrated health and social care programme. And again, one of the CEOs across the combined 8 authorities will lead the adult social care stream with me, and also the work stream for integrated health and social care, to make sure that we maximise that opportunity as well out of this.
Sorry, so you're saying that might be extra cost because obviously the... Well, getting the extra funding in to assist with that extra programme. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got Jonathan, Cecilia, and then I've got another question. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, it's a seal.
I can't read my handwriting.
It's been around a while.
Anna, if you can just bear with me on some numbers, okay, because I'm theconfused.com. So at the moment we've got a £43 million budget. If we round that up to £6 million a piece for the 7 Ds and Bs and the NCC, that gives us a contingency of an extra £5 million, which is £6 million each roughly. If we said, as we did earlier, that we're going to have an equal split in this. If we're going to use 18 million of business rates, which equates to roughly 2.25 million each, and take that off that 43 or the 48 million, that leaves us 30 million. Split that between 8, that's roughly 3.75 million each, is what I guesstimate that's what we should be putting into this fund. However, earlier on you said that we've got £6 million earmarked, which is what I put down as what the NCC's budget is, but you also mentioned that a £4 million. Is that a £4 million that we've already spent, or is that £4 million that we anticipate to spend somewhere? I'm just confused where that £4 million come from, so if you could just clear that one up for me at the moment, please.
Yeah, so originally every council agreed to put £500,000 in, so across the 8 of us it was 4 million, of which we've only spent about £1 million. So there is still a £3 million pot to be allocated and used in the programme.
So that's good then. So basically then that we've only got to find 3.25 million in my reckoning, thereabouts. And that's important. Why is that important? That's important because that's the budget round about 2019-20 that we're working on at the moment, because obviously we haven't set a budget for 2021, because we will do, because we're here for 2 more years. Where the question is how robust is that? I'm going to use the 48 million. I know it's probably wrong, but I'm just saying rounding nice round figures, £6 million a piece. How sure? Because, I mean, obviously we had, albeit rumours, and they were rumours, I must admit, is that the actual cost of transformation in Northamptonshire could be as high as 90 million, 80 to 90 million, which is an absolutely extraordinary amount of money that people were mentioning a few months back. So how much can we be reassured, not only as a committee here, the ONS committee here, but the people of Northamptonshire, how can we assure them that we won't exceed anywhere near that rumoured figure of 80 million, but how sure can we see that we can keep capped to the 48 million that I've just been mentioning? That's an important thing to do, because that's what we're telling people. We're telling people now that the transformation is going to be approximately 43 million, so I'll round it up nice, rounded to 48 million. How sure can we be, if we can be at all sure, that that is going to be that figure? It's not going to go to 50, 60, 70 or 80 million. Or sure you can be, so I'm not
Sign here.
I'm not going to say Anna said.
I bet you did. No. So first of all, the reason that I think these figures about 80 million were banded around is because initially we had a programme plan that was talking about 40 million of pure cost just to move us from 8 to 2. with no transformation, nothing else. But everybody knew, and all of the track record, and if you look at, which we did, look at all of the other unitary transformations and what happened, knew that if you didn't do any transformation, you'd have to do it twice. So you do 40 million to transfer it and 40 million to transform it. And what we're saying is we've brought them together into a combined implementation and transformation. So as we're actually implementing it, we will be also reducing our onward costs and redeploying and changing what we're doing and working in a very different way. In terms of how confident we are, so we have worked up a lot of detail. A lot of very experienced people have looked through it. Are there things in there that are still estimated? Yes, there are. So you'd imagine, for example, we'd expect the network that gets put in when we connect that up. So we can only work on the basis we're going to have to connect up to create a WAN, for example, a network, and what that typically costs. We have got quotes for that, but it all depends ultimately, because I know from experience too, it depends on how many sites you connect in the end, for example. So, but we have allowed for some contingency in that, and I go back to what I said as well, is what we haven't built in then is what is going to be the return on the investment for some of the transformation programs. So I know, for example, that some of the business rate pilots have a 2-to-1 return, and at the moment we've only assumed the investment cost, we haven't built in the money that might come back. So there are other contingencies in there. So all I can tell you is with my experience of running programs and transformation, we're as confident as we could be that they are realistic costs, that they're looking at the right things, and that over time, as we build in the return on investment, we should see those come down, or at a minimum, allow us more contingency to do more and deal with anything that we don't expect. But they are robust. They have been through all the FDs. We've looked at everything. We've made some adjustments for things that we know about real redundancies, not just estimated based on some assumed salaries. You know, all those kind of questions that you'd expect us to do, we've done as best we can, and we know what areas we've still got to finalise.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Cecile.
So I am new on those committee, but for me, I listen to all what you say, and what is important is the direction of travel and to take into account, or to put our officer into account. And when we go, we have been dealing with minutiae now, and I think it's very important that we do not deal with minutiae, but with the direction of travel. For me, 2 questions were put. It was a 43 million, and that is very important. How is it spent? And that, if it doesn't go south or north, that is one we have to trust our officer to deliver. And the other question was Councillor Brown, it's the trust. But in between, we have been discussing really about minutiae. And I find it, with our service, the way they are, the fragility, I think the overview and scrutiny committee should make sure, as the officer, if they are happy with the process, if they are not, or if we find it's a fault in the process. But for me, the scrutiny is to see if the process is well run, and not to throw figure or things. We have paper in front of us. We have to ask officers if they are still confident. If they are confident, we should move on and ask for something else. But to have all those figures and big calculation and so on, even I was confused. So I think it would be helpful for the overview and scrutiny, and overview said it all, that we don't ask for the full balance sheet and so on, because we are not expert. We have officers to do that. We become expert when we have extreme doubt. But if the officer deliver, I think we should not waste too much time. Thank you.
Your opinion's welcome. Of course, what we have to do is to try and ensure that we are confident of what the officers are saying. Sometimes that does mean going into a little more detail, but I absolutely take your point about it can be confusing, and I certainly will welcome the more detailed breakdown and briefing on the June the 10th. I think that will be happy. But I say, yeah, we need to understand some of this stuff ourselves, so we also can be confident. Jill.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with you that we do need some of these details, albeit they're not as detailed as can be ascertained later on. My question is to do with buildings. Presumably, I mean, moving from 8 councils to 2, some buildings will be unnecessary. I don't know whether anything's been worked out in detail, but some buildings might be able to be sold off. Has anything been calculated in with those calculations so far of sales of property, potential income from that to offset some of these costs, or is that to come?
That's one of the cases that we need to work up with, when I was saying about the return. So we need to look at all of the estate in the round, and going back to the health and social care discussion, there's also a discussion around all of the health partner assets too, because actually what we need to do, and what everybody's agreed on, is we need to look at the different communities, what's needed where, what buildings we've already all got there, and then how we might co-locate together to be closer to the communities. So there's an absolute will to do that. No decisions have been made about the closure of any buildings, but there's obviously a sensible opportunity to look at that, and then look at the combined, then if there's any disposals available, what we might do with those, and how they might be put to best use.
Richard.
Yes, it's I actually agree with Chair with regard to the minutiae. You know, that's the old way of doing business, when we didn't ask any questions and we just let people crack. So this is where scrutiny has changed, and to be frank with you, Anna, you cope with those questions very well, and we appreciate the detail that you give us, which then gives us reassurance to then reflect back to our residents. So we will probably continue to go for the minutiae, and hopefully we won't confuse ourselves. But the question I have for you is really about there is the local government reform, and there is transformation, and it's only it's an impression I get with regard to, from the work I'm doing with regard to the joint committees and the work scrutiny, is they seem to be two separate beings. It seems to be that Mr. Cheeseman is running the reform, and there seems to be another sort of chief execs and leaders doing it. Can you reassure us that there will be one plan combining the both, so that when we're looking for accountability and this single point of contact, you know, where does the responsibility stop? There is a figurehead to say, actually, you are responsible for both these strands, so that when it comes down to success or failure, we know who to go to. Because I just get a sense that they are two separate entities, and they haven't quite gone into one plan. It's just reassurance that there will just be the one plan, and including the two elements.
That is exactly the plan, and that is exactly what we're hoping will get agreed and shared shortly too. So in that sense, what you'll get is the transformation activities, you'll get the mechanics of aggregation and disaggregation, but then all sitting under an overarching transformation for the whole county and all of our areas, including everything we're already doing.
Sorry, can I just supplement? Would that be, will Mr. Cheeseman head that, or how do you see that structure?
I can't confirm that to you today, because that's what's being just confirmed now, and will be in the published pack that goes out on the 10th.
Thank you. I've got a quick question. Just going back, I mean, Jill spoke about property and assets, and we as a committee recently got a briefing note about NCC's assets, where we were told the current strategy of the county council was to split in, or to develop two office hubs, one at 1 Angel Square, one at William Knibb in Kettering. And I'm just wondering, does that mean there have been discussions about the split to unitary, that those will be the HQs of the new council? Because I wasn't aware of that.
No, I said the opposite. There'd been no decision about HQs of any councils. All there had been is an agreement that we ought to look at the combined set, what we needed and how many people we need in each area, and therefore who or where were the best assets for us to use.
Okay, sorry, that was slightly off topic, but Adam.
I hope you don't consider it off topic, Chairman, because my question's of a similar vein. For a lot of the assets within the county council's portfolio, and indeed even more easily within the districts and boroughs portfolio, you can divide on the basis of geography. However, we're sitting in the most expensive and the most high-profile building within the county council's portfolio, albeit one that's been sold to a private investment company. Has the question been raised of any sort of settlement or compensation for the North Unitary? Because there may be a feeling amongst taxpayers in the north of the county that they've ended up subsidising a very grandiose potential headquarters for the West Northamptonshire Unitary.
No, there's been no such discussion as that, but I think you have to think about the bigger picture. There'll be a whole range of things like that. So I know for my own benefit, for example, the Shore PFI contracts, we'll have to look at how they get dealt with too. And equally, things like debt. So customer debt will have to be split. There's all sorts of things we have to go through, but there has been no discussion about that or any decision made at the moment.
I mean, I'm always happy to look at the bigger picture, but obviously as a politician I have to consider the questions that residents are going to throw my way, and I'm sure that will be a question that is posed to all of us, given the very high-profile nature of the questions surrounding One Angel Square.
Yeah, and I'm personally looking forward to some very interesting discussions around those issues. My last question, it was mentioned earlier that there will be a cost of setting up the now required Children's Trust, and that we'd be looking to receive government funding for that. Presumably, I mean, do you have any idea what sort of extra cost that is, and what would happen if we don't get government funding?
Personally, no, I don't. I don't know if Ian wants to. Is he still here? Do you want to comment or not? I'm not cited on that discussion at the moment.
I've come up to the table not to give any additional information that Anna's got. I mean, we've only just found out about the establishment of a trust, and so the first reaction is the question that we're all asking is what's the cost and how will that be paid for? So that is the focus, about identifying that and going to DFE. Whether we're successful or not, we'll find out in due course.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Jonathan?
It's not so much a question, Chair, it's more of a statement. We're sitting here today in an overview and scrutiny committee, and that's what we're here to do, and that's carry out robust overview, robust scrutiny, and to ensure accountability in the NCC for the public that we represent. We can't water down our responsibility. We're talking about overseeing possibly the biggest event in Northamptonshire's history, where we're dissolving 8 councils and creating 2. And I'm afraid that the public will not only demand, but deserve the appropriate robust scrutiny and overview that takes place as well, because we are going to be held accountable to them to deliver that. So, and your team, I applaud you today, actually. You've given us the answers that we've been asking. Unabashed, should we say. There was nothing hidden, I don't think. It's all coming out, and it will continue to come out, Chair. I'm pretty sure it will be. And this is only the start. This is only the start of, shall I dare I say, 2 years' worth of transformation and scrutiny that we're going to come. So, this is good getting this out like this, and it's good that we're questioning now, because we're actually setting a platform going forward to continue. And I think that the officers involved actually probably going to be grateful that we're here asking these questions to ensure that what goes on, and I'm sure the commissioners are of the same view, is that we're here to make sure that the job's done properly.
Thank you. Malcolm, any
Yes, Chair. Just a slight follow-up, really. I've indicated earlier how important the 10th of June is as a meeting. I'm just wondering whether the information that we're going to receive on that day will come to us early, so we have time to look at it. It's very difficult to go to a meeting, read something and try and be involved as well. So I'm just wondering if there's any plans for members to have the information before the meeting so we can dial those ourselves and get involved.
Quick question. Do you know if there are any plans to do that? If not, it could form part of our discussions we're about to have about recommendations.
The communication plans for that and its release is being discussed at the meeting that Matt's just gone to. So hopefully out of the back of that, then there'll be a schedule of these are the briefings and the briefings for staff and all the other things you'd expect with it.
Right, any more questions? I've got Victoria before I thank the officers and let them go prior to us discussing our response and any recommendations, conclusions we have. Victoria.
I suppose this could fall into that bit, but as I take the lead on children's scrutiny here, I had done a lot of work on Children's Trust and looking at other authorities who had gone to Children's Trust, both successfully and unsuccessfully. So I will share that with the scrutiny group prior to the meeting on June the 10th, so that we're well informed about what's happened elsewhere. And that's without any prejudgment, because the approach is balanced.
Chris.
Thanks, Chair. There is a question around the cost of setting up the Children's Trust, because I believe the County Council was in receipt of some money from the government some time ago, £4.5 million sticks in my mind, to help it with the cost of doing that very thing. Is that the case? Has that money been spent? Is that still available to us? Does anyone know the position? Thank you.
Oh, so you might know more than I do on that, but that money was used for transformation and work towards the trust. And as far as I was aware, sort of to the end of my tenure, there was some money left in that, and the government, we'd had assurances that the government weren't going to reclaim it. Whether that can then be used or hasn't been used elsewhere is probably something that you could answer.
I don't know the detail, Chairman. I was aware of the £4.5 million. What we want to establish is where that was utilised, which will be of benefit in creating the trust. Now it's a reality, and that's part of the consideration that we're giving. It's my understanding also that yes, whilst we have received it, there isn't an intention to pull any of that back or claw any of that back.
It should be reclaimed. What I would say that the work towards setting up a trust wasn't as advanced as we thought it was, is what the feedback would be from the Children's Commissioner.
Okay. Seems there are obviously going to be questions around the Children's Trust financially, which we can comment on. Unless there's anything else, I'd like to thank Anna and Ian for coming today, as indeed Matt, who unfortunately had to leave. Thank you very much. We will now move on to discussing whether we have any comments or recommendations, or indeed whether we require any further information or briefings. Sorry, you're leaving? Oh. Okay. 5-minute comfort break. Sounds like a plan to me. Cheers.